I'm going to have Alice and Stan do a legislative update, and then we will pass it off to Mallory to do a financial update. Okay? So Helen, if you want to take it from here.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Helen Slate with Nelson Mullins, and I think my colleague Stan Jones is on here as well, or at least I hope he is. And I was asked to provide a legislative update of sorts to you guys this evening. So I wanted to take off on the fact that where we are right now is we're in the stage where, you know, we've just had the election here in Georgia, and the balance of power, of course, in the state is remains the same. We still have a Republican governor, and we still have a legislature, which is, you know, controlled by the Republican Party. So at the moment, we do not know all the committee chairs for both the House and the Senate. We anticipate we may know something about the Senate chairs within the next week or so. As it relates to the House, we don't think that we will know all of those perhaps until after the legislative session starts, which of course does not begin until January 11th as constitutionally mandated. It is the second Monday in January. So once we know who will be serving in the various committee roles, we will of course update the Georgia Academy of Audiology, and so that you can get that information out to your members. At the moment, the House and the Senate Health and Human Services Committee chairs are still in the General Assembly. They've been reelected. It's just not clear yet whether or not there will be any shifts in the actual positions held by those particular chairs. We don't anticipate such, but one never knows in these times that we're living in. So I wanted to also give you a quick update about House Bill 34. House Bill 34 is a piece of legislation that's been pre-filed by the chairman of, by Representative Dave Belton in Buckhead. He's a Republican from Buckhead. And Representative Belton has actually authored a number of the other compact bills that have been passed and signed into law. And he has actually authored another version of the speech language pathology and audiology compact. You may recall that Senate Bill 306, which was proposed this year in 2020, and which actually passed both the House and Senate, was vetoed by Governor Kemp. Because he thought that the legislation should actually have been vetted by the Georgia Occupational Regulatory Review Council. So Representative Belton has proposed House Bill 34, which is this compact legislation to allow speech language pathologists and audiologists to actually provide telehealth services across state lines and have some limited ability to practice. So we anticipate that that legislation, while it's in the pre-filed category at the moment, will actually be fully introduced once the session starts. So we've actually also had a number of communications with both legislators and the governor's office regarding the compact legislation and why it was vetoed by Governor Kemp. And we are working through the various hurdles in an effort to try to get the Georgia Occupational Regulatory Review Council, which has been utilized in other instances to look at bills relating to new professions, to see whether or not the council will take this legislation up, or whether or not it may just say, look, this is not a new profession. We're passing it back to the General Assembly so that it can move forward. So we're still waiting to hear more about that, but we've had some communications with the governor's lawyers about the requirement that the legislation be addressed by the council. So most recently, the biennial has just met in Athens, Georgia. That is the training ground for the new legislators that were newly elected at the November election. So that has just concluded. We understand that the event was not as widely attended as in years past, and that's, I guess, due to the COVID-19 issues that are facing our state right now. So as I mentioned, the session will start on January 11th. Once all that kicks off, we'll know more about what the status of the state's budget is. The governor will release his budget probably later in the week, that week of January 11th, we will understand whether or not there's any proposed rate cuts, in other words, to reimbursement for any of the healthcare providers. We are not anticipating anything like that. But of course, we'll keep you posted if there are any changes in the Medicaid budget that might impact your audiologist. In terms of just the logistics for the session, we think that things will just typically or take place like they did in June in order to try to address all the various pieces of legislation. We think that everything's going to be held virtually in terms of meetings. There will, of course, be some folks, there at the Capitol, the legislators themselves, but we anticipate everything will be online and people can actually participate online. The House has already instituted new processes by which it can vote virtually through an electronic means, and they've purchased equipment to do that. So there won't be any of these long, lengthy roll call votes that we all witnessed in June of this year. So the speaker has also formed a new committee to look at safety protocols around COVID. We anticipate those recommendations coming out pretty quickly in terms of what this committee is recommending. And we think that those recommendations are going to be a lot like what we saw with respect to the completion of the session in June of this year. So there are also some other bills that have been introduced, or not really introduced, but pre-filed this year. And all of those measures are by Representative Kim Schofield. There's a House Bill 39, a House Bill 41, and House Bill 42. House Bill 39 is about short-term health insurance plans, and it provides for 181-day coverage limitation and inclusion of most of the essential health benefits that were included in the Affordable Care Act. It also prohibits medical underwriting in its proposal. House Bill 41 is a mechanism by which she seeks to increase consumer access to healthcare by improving the network adequacy. It would apply to all health carriers offering network plans, but it does exclude dental and vision plans. House Bill 42, her third bill, seeks to encourage physicians to practice in underserved areas of the state, and is actually proposing a grant of $25,000 for up to 4 years for these physicians that will agree to serve rural Georgia. It's limited to physicians. It's not addressing any of the other healthcare providers. So those are just some of the things that we're seeing right now. And I don't know if Stan wants to hop on here and add any other pieces of information. And today I was just talking to Stan about the fact that my phone has been blowing up about the fact that Representative Trey Kelly, who's from Cedartown, has actually been indicted today on some, and I haven't read the indictment, so I can't really speak to the specifics of it, but it relates to an automobile accident which occurred and which made the news earlier this year involving one of his constituents. So that's kind of like big news. And the legislature is, of course, kind of consumed right now with the elections issues and addressing, some of the questions that they're receiving from their various constituents about how the election processes worked. Stan, are you there?
Hang on, you're muted. Press Alt-A. Alt-A. Krista, can you manually unmute Stan?
I can ask him to unmute, but I can't see that I can do it for him.
Dan, if you tap at the bar at the bottom,
He's
there
good.
you go.
I'm not very good at this. I'm sorry. So, things are wildly up in the air right now. And I think that's just a fact of life. the intensity of discussion about whether the election should be started over or changed here in Georgia was going to go on at least through next week. You know, it's on the 14th or 15th that the Electoral College actually votes. There is a lot of anxiety in the Republican majority about whether they will lose their seats if they don't take on the election as the president's urged them to do. And, you know, you would hope that things would sort of settle back into dull normal, but we're not going to get there for a while. I think the interest in elections will stay very intense here through the January 5th runoffs. There'll be a fair amount of activity the first couple of weeks of the session. Then after the inauguration, it may settle down a little bit. We did want to say that the elections are, relevant to your practices. So, at the federal level, the issues will become, what happens with the Medicaid waiver proposal that Governor Kemp has made. It could stay in place as is. It could be, the new CMS could ask for other changes, or nothing could happen for a while. At the state level, there's going to be an increasing interest in anything sort of related to management of Medicaid of the CMOs themselves. We're rolling up in 2022 for the rebid of the CMOs, and the roll up to that means that there's interest in what does the RFP require the CMOs to do. That's a time where you can be active in sort of proposing to DCH some changes that you would like to see. So, right today, we can't tell you what's going to be the outcome of, all the noise that we're hearing. We'll know a good bit more next week, and then even more, I'd say the 1st of February, and we'll see whether we settle back into normal or not. I guess Helen's already mentioned the compact. We're working on that, getting it reintroduced. Now that's the immediately pressing issue. But, this is a time of uncertainty, of change, shifts, and that's kind of what we specialize in. So we'll be alert to it for you and keep you posted. I think the main thing around the agenda probably will be the compact, and then the other things are getting ready to see what happens with reimbursement issues with the care management organizations, and that can be affected at either the state or the local level. I'm happy to answer any questions you got. If you're a political junkie, that couldn't be a more fascinating time, but I think we're also all worn out. So I'm sure everybody can share that. Are there any questions or thoughts, reactions?
There aren't any questions in the chat field, so I think we're good.
Thank you.
Okay, Mallory, do you want to give us a financial update?
Absolutely, I can do that. So as of today, we have 72 active members. In our main GAA account, we have about $4,600, $4,667 to be exact. In our PAC account, we have $3,454, and in our PayPal account, we have $1,865. Kaden said that in that PayPal account, some of them are doubles that we still have to give refunds for. So she's been working on that before we upload the rest of the money into the accounts.
Okay, anybody have any questions about the financials? All right, Lacey, you want to go ahead and introduce?
Sure. Before I introduce Felicia, I would just like to make a point to have everybody try to reach out to fellow audiologists to try to recruit anybody who hasn't become a member, and try to just relay the importance of getting involved to support our profession, and to make sure that we have enough funds to support our lobbyists that we have as a month-to-month payment. They are worth every penny, but they are not inexpensive. So we do need to try to encourage membership, and we also do need to try to encourage donations to the PAC as well as to GAA so that we can do everything we need to protect our scope of practice. So now I'd like to introduce Felicia Thomas, who's going to do a quick little training on Oticon. Felicia Thomas is the Oticon account manager for North Georgia and Metro Atlanta. She has been an active member of GAA for many years, having practiced at Carrollton Ear, Nose, and Throat for 18 years before joining Oticon. She currently serves as the Southern representative for the Georgia Academy of Audiology. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from Clemson University and her Master of Arts in Audiology from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Go Vols. In her spare time, she enjoys spending time with her husband, Ricky, of 20 years, and 2 children, Kendall and Samuel, along with all things sports. Go ahead, Felicia, and thank you.
Felicia, you're muted.
It does help to unmute. Hello again to everyone. I hope that you all are having a wonderful week. I am going to do a brief overview, just a short teaser tonight. And as I talk a little bit more, you will understand why it is just a teaser tonight, because I don't want to be put in OT jail, which is something that definitely exists. So I'm now going to share my screen here. So at Oticon, we have been committed to brain hearing technology for many years. And we currently have an entire portfolio built on brain hearing that allows you to empower your patients with life. We have options available for those that demand the best in terms of premium technology. For those cost-conscious patients, we have an everyday essential product, along with pediatric offerings, products for your power users, and also for those experiencing single-sided deafness. Tony Hsieh, the Zappos founder, once said, "Whatever you're thinking, think big, think bigger." And when he founded Zappos, he revolutionized not only how we buy shoes, but particularly how I buy shoes. And what January 2021 is going to show is our next phase into how we are thinking bigger in terms of meeting your patients' hearing healthcare needs. You are all invited to Oticon Next launch event on January the 12th, 2021 from 12 to 2 p.m. You can register today, of course, at the oticonnext.com/2020.com in order to secure your spot. The main event will be from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern time, and then we will have a virtual exhibit hall known as the Zone from 2 to 6 p.m. I've also included my email address if you have any questions or want any additional information. But as I told you, I will go to OD jail, so there's very little that I can potentially share with you, but I'm happy to answer any general questions that you may have. I do want to take the opportunity to wish everyone a happy holiday season. Given how many of us have risen to the occasion in 2020, I'm optimistic that 2021 is going to be a year of breakthroughs and new beginnings for us all. I wish you and yours joy, peace, and togetherness this holiday season and in the year to come. I now have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Alice Salino. Dr. Alice Salino graduated from Columbus State University in 2003 with a degree in business administration. And in 2008, with her clinical doctorate in audiology from Auburn University. She served on the board of the Georgia Academy of Audiology for 8 years, including 2 terms as president. In 2019, she was appointed by Governor Brian Kemp to serve on the Board of Examiners for Speech Pathology and Audiology. And in 2020, she was appointed as the cognizant of the GABESPA, which means she works with the state's legal team to evaluate legal complaints against practitioners. And Alice, I hope I got all of those letters in there.
Great.
She is the executive director of the Columbus Speech and Hearing Center, a practice started in 1978 by her mother, Susie Ford, PhD, who has been a practicing speech pathologist for over 50 years. So it is my pleasure and my honor to introduce to you Dr. Alice Salino.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful, kind introduction. And I'm going to first say that Zoom is not my favorite, and you have to bear with me as I learn how to rework it every time I start. So let me pull this up 1 second. Okay. Okay, is everybody on the same page with me? You can see the kind of the beginning of the presentation.
We see it.
Very good, thank you. Please let me know if at any point technology breaks down and you can't hear me or see me, or there's a delay, because I really very much want this to be useful for all of us and interesting. All right, so back to the disclosure and disclaimers, and Felicia did a great job of the introduction. I will first just want to say nothing in this course should be constituted as legal advice. Obviously, I am not a lawyer. Stan is our lawyer, but it's a moment to put a plug in for the legal community. No matter what practice setting you're in, I cannot recommend highly enough a healthcare lawyer, someone that you can talk to, whether they're on retainer or whatever your association is. I think that can be an absolutely critical part of practice, because there are huge vats of quicksand and problems that are all around us all the time. And most of the time we don't even know it, but that's what your lawyers are for. So also I will say, I try to be very active in the professional organizations in this state. I am a member of the Georgia Academy of Audiology and have been for a while. I'm a member of GASHA, the Georgia Speech and Hearing Association, and I want to make a plug for them. They do a great job, and they do represent audiological interest. The American Academy of Audiology, and I'm a member of ASHA. This is year 2 for me on the board. I was trying to look through the names of everybody on this call. Has anybody present served on the Georgia Board of Examiners at any point? Krista, if you see anybody, let me know. If you have, I need you to be a wingman in this presentation, because you'll, I hope, testify with me that it's complicated and there is a lot to it, and it changes all the time. As soon as you get one handle, there you lose your footing. So if you do have experience on this board, and I couldn't quite tell as the names flitted around, please let me know if you hear me say anything that you would have a different opinion about. I have a private practice, Columbus Speech and Hearing Center. I'm so lucky to work with my mom and a whole bunch of other professionals. I love that. The field of communication disorders has been very good to me, and I'm very dedicated to the survival of both audiology and speech pathology. And finally, I have recently learned that I am an Enneagram type 8, which my friends tell me means I have a problem with verbal filters and apparently don't have a very good grasp on social norms. So if I say something that is interesting, well, that's just part of it. But the good news is I'm rarely bothered by anything. So please ask your questions. I would love for this to be as back and forth and active as we can make it. Okay. Oh, one more disclaimer. There is no way to know all of the answers involved with the legal practice of audiology in this state. The board has 8 members plus 3 lawyers, and it takes all of us, and we still are often having to pull in other sources within the Secretary of State's office to try to figure out the answer to a particular question. If you've ever had to be involved in any kind of legal quest through the board, you'll know that when it's set in black and white, it's easy, but that's not why we exist. We exist because there is gray. And let me tell you, 2020 had a lot of gray come up with, particularly with telepractice, what that meant, how we went through that. So I do just want to say you were absolutely capable and likely to come up with a question that I can't answer. And I will absolutely try to find that answer for you. So this is how to get me. I'll send this presentation out and you're welcome to share it if you want to. That's my contact info, and I do take text messages. That's a good way because I'll ignore you if I don't know what the number is. All right, so the goals. This goal, this really centers around the ethical practice of audiology in the state of Georgia, and I've broken that into 4 areas that I think are important. In the pursuit of ethical practice, you need to know these 4 categories. 1, what the legal structure of the practice of audiology is here in the state. 2, how to find that most current legal information. And they're different. Once you understand kind of the framework, you realize that the individual points can move and change pretty rapidly. So you need to know where to find the most current information. You need to understand the current political happenings which are shaping your practice of audiology at a pretty rapid rate. And then I think it's important to understand and identify some ethical issues and even talk about some related to the practice of communication disorder sciences, because I'm a fan of understanding how things break down so you can avoid that yourself. Okay, we're going to go through part 1 and then we'll take questions. Again, the legal structure is important to understand because if you know what the rules are and where they come from, you can keep within the bumpers much better. And also, you have influence over the ethical practice of audiology and hearing services in this state. So shout out to Helen and Stan, who helped me tremendously pare this down into a bulleted presentation. So Georgia laws. First, the Georgia laws are written by the General Assembly, which is your House and Senate members. And I'd also like to say, Helen and Stan, absolutely chime in if I miss a point or misstate it. So we're going to look at an example of how that actually comes up and comes to be. But from a high level, first it's got to get through it's got to get introduced through a General Assembly member. Then it's going to be passed. If it's first introduced in the House, let's say the House member presents it, he or she writes it with help, presents it, passes it, goes over to the Senate, is presented, passed, and then once it gets all the way through the General Assembly, it goes to the governor's office, and the governor has 40 days to consider that new law for signature. It happens most of the time when it gets to the governor's office. You would hope that it will be passed into law, but not every time, and that's what Helen alluded to or spoke about earlier. That's where we got tagged last year on the compact bill that was presented. Once it's signed, it's compiled into the Georgia Code Annotated, and this is sort of synonymous with the Bible of Georgia law. It's what the laws are, and it's the final word. Audiology and speech language pathology are together in this code. And we're under Title 43, under Professions and Businesses, and we're at Chapter 44. Here's a link. All of these links are working, by the way, and I'll pull them up again at a different time in the presentation. But that's how the laws are written and get through the General Assembly. Once they get through the General Assembly, they're implemented by the way of the state rules and regulations, and the state rules and regulation is found under the Department of Secretary of State. And we're under Department 609 of the Secretary of State, the State Board of Examiners for Speech, Language Pathology, and Audiology. I'd like to take a side note quickly. The Secretary of State right now, the Georgia Secretary of State, is probably the most harangued man in the country. Brad Raffensperger, who you've seen in the news, has certainly been the subject of a lot of tweets and a lot of concern about the veracity of the election. And the reason I say that and bring it up is because we think about our world of audiology because it so consumes us as we're seeing our patients and in our busy practices, but we are a spec. All of the different disciplines are specs, and we are heavily influenced by what's happening to those that are over us, and he's certainly over us. So you can think about the poor Brad Raffensperger is right now, who is in our chain of command in some way. He's having a hard time. And if we tried to change things today, I don't know that he'd take the call. That's my opinion. The rules and regulations prior to adoption are proposed by the boards governing the professions. They're put out for public comment. They're reviewed by the governor and committees overseeing that legislation. Our board duties, the Georgia Board of Examiners, are found in that Code of Georgia citation right below 43-44-6. Now, the State Board of Examiners, so now it's come down to the State Board of Examiners level, which is short JBESPA. 8 members appointed by the governor who interpret the laws that have been passed into the Georgia Code pertaining only to speech and language pathology and audiology. Those 8 members are 3 speech pathologists, 3 audiologists, 1 member at large, and then 1 ENT. The ENT position has been vacant for as long as I've been on the board, which is only 2 years, but I think it was vacant for a while before that. The policy, or GBESPA polices the practice of audiology and speech pathology within the state to the extent allowable by law by influencing a person's license. And we'll talk about that because that's different than I think some practitioners think we do. We can impose sanctions, we can revoke a license, we can require further continuing education, etc. Sometimes there are unique situations that arise. For example, the telepractice. The Alabama Board of Examiners just had a unique situation where within COVID-19, they decided that to practice, if you wanted to remote practice and see patients in Alabama, but you were in another state, as long as your office had one Alabama licensed provider employed within the office, then the rest of your providers could sort of piggyback on that one and be within practicing legal practicing rights within the state of Alabama. I bring that up because I felt like it was a great example of some of the things that come up at last minute notice that are filed away in a different place. And Georgia's the same. We have a different website and location of some of those little things that pop up that nobody thought about in terms of, it's not a big law, but it's an interpretation of the law. So those are those unique situations. Another one is what constitutes appropriate continuing education credit for the state of Georgia. That's found in the link below. All right, one more. The purpose of the board. The purpose of the board is to administer and enforce establish and revise the requirements for licensure. So we don't police things that are not related directly to your license. So if you have a complaint filed against you, and we get lots of interesting complaints, but if you have a complaint filed against you because you are chronically late for work. Well, if that didn't influence patient care in ethical standards of how you treat patients and how you document, et cetera, that's not a board issue. If there's a complaint that you prescribed an inappropriate hearing aid, but it was really a matter of opinion, that's not a license complaint. Now, if you were fitting hearing aids without an audiology license or a hearing aid dealer and dispenser license, that's under the purview of the board. But it has to be specific to the license. And we do get a lot of complaints where it really wasn't about the license. It was about a beef with the practitioner. As I was looking, there was an orange dot that poked up. So Krista, does that mean there are questions? I'm happy to stop anytime.
There is a question. Kate is asking regarding the position open for ENT on the board. She's wondering how we submit a submission, or how you submit a nomination.
I will find that out. I think you can send
Alice,
it to me. Yeah.
this is Helen. I'll jump in here. I'll try to help you out.
Please do.
I'm your lifeline tonight. You're welcome. So what you can do is, if you will get us the resume of the particular ENT that you would like to propose to be added to the board, Dan and I can actually send that resume to the appropriate folks within the governor's office and ask that they be considered the next time that the governor is making, appointments to the board. So we can help with that. So again, you need to provide the, CV or resume of that individual and just forward it us for that.
That's great. I'm gonna say that this is an opinion, but I feel strongly about it. Boards which cannot be filled don't get as much attention as boards where people are clamoring to get on. So if you know of an ENT who's willing to participate in the board, that would be great. It makes a difference. It really does. It's not empty. Thank you, Kate and Helen. Good. Other questions? Keep going.
Keep going. I don't see any other questions right now, but just a reminder to everybody, make sure you check in the chat box. I have a couple of direct messages out nobody's answered. And just want to make sure that you all remember to post some questions here. All right, Alice, go ahead.
Okay. So again, the board really just polices licenses, and there's a whole lot more to practicing than your licensure, as we all know. But that's what the board does. All right, one more time, let's talk about the flow just as a summary. Laws are made in the General Assembly. When they pass the General Assembly, then they go to the rules and regulations of the Secretary of State, which filters down to the board for interpretation and clarification where needed. And then that's where it's rolled out, and it's the responsibility of the providers to know and follow it. And that is where our state associations, GAA, GASHA, even AAA and ASHA are good about trying to put out information so that you can follow the current practicing laws. Since we just answered questions, let me know if you have one now. That's a typical stopping point, but otherwise I'll keep going to resources.
Keep going.
Okay. So part 2, I think it's critical to know where to find the information as you try to navigate this. The landscape changes all the time. In fact, as soon as you feel like you get a handle, you'll realize that it's changing out from under you again. There's a quote that is important to realize. Ignorance of the law is not somebody else's problem. It holds no water in court. It holds no water with insurance companies or really anybody, but it's sort of scary. You don't know what you don't know. And so I highly encourage active monitoring of these sites. The first thing we're going to do is look at how to track the bills in the Georgia General Assembly. Let me make sure this is going to work for me. Do you all see the Georgia General? Hold on, it says okay, hang on. Now, can you see the tracking a bill through the General Assembly? Okay. This is where you can look at what legislation is being proposed, where it is, and what's happening. And let me show you a just a brief introduction on how to find things. If you go to advanced search, and you can play with all these, this is a useful website. Go to advanced search, look up in the session. You can choose last year's session if you wanted to see what happened with bills. You can actually see what's already being pre-filed this year. Scroll down to the 2020, 2020, that's 2021 and 2022 session, and we can look and see what is already being pre-filed. For example, there was one I wanted to show you just generally. Look at House Bill 12 about controlled substances. Possession of certain quantities of marijuana constitutes a misdemeanor. There's one, special license plates for veteran spouses in certain instances. Keep on going, and this will it's a great, concise resource for what's happening, what's out there, what's being presented. I'm going to show you the compact. We'll get into this later. It's House Bill 34, Helen. Yep. By Dave Belton. Helen was talking about this earlier. Representative Belton has pre-filed it, and when we pull it up, there you go. It'll take a second. There's a summary. The bill's being enacted related to, no, wait, did I change? I selected 33. Apologies. Let me go back. There's 34. Related to speech language pathologist and audiologist, the Interstate Compact. This is a 31-page bill. I suggest you read it because it really will significantly change what it looks like to practice in the state of Georgia, as well as Alabama, as well as, I don't even have all the states memorized, but it's a 10-state compact that we would be included into. So read this. This will, if passed, which we certainly hope it will be this year, this directly affects you specifically. That's where to find, this website though is how to find out what's happening. Let me go back. The next one, how to find the Title 43, Chapter 44, the laws of Georgia related to speech language pathology and audiology. I'm going to show that to you. If I'm doing this correctly. Okay. All right. This is the entire code of Georgia. I wanted to show you the entire code because if you have an interest in looking at domestic relations or fire and safety or whatever you might have an interest in, I kind of get lost in the weeds in these when I'm having an ADD moment. You can. It's important to know where that resource is. We are found under Title 43, which I'm clicking, and then under Title 43, Chapter 44. Apologize for making you dizzy. Speech language pathologist and audiologist. And when you access that, this is the law, the letter of the law as it relates to the practice, which includes a scope of practice, which includes licensing requirements. This is what we always have to go back to through interpretation and as we practice. Okay. Are there questions at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
Kate has another question. She's asking, does the Interstate Compact, will it allow us to use hearing aid technology for remote programming across state lines? And is that only from Georgia or from other states too? And she had a follow-up just comment that she said she's heard that Tennessee could be an issue.
Helen, what you got?
So Stan can jump in here as well, but really the compact, before it's functional, has to be adopted by 10 states. And then those 10 states will set up the rules and regs to govern the compact. And with respect to that, the compact states will then, whatever states have adopted that compact will then determine whether or not the practice can be governed in that manner. Stan, you want to say anything more? I mean, but right now the compact hasn't been passed in Georgia, and I'm thinking now we're at 6 states that have passed I think it's 6 states now that have passed the compact nationally.
once the compact is passed, you know, a audiologist in Georgia can practice, you know, in another state that has adopted the compact, but you practice according to the scope of practice in the other state. So, you know, whether the technology can be used across state lines is really going to be determined where the patient you are working with is. So it's not, you know, this may happen eventually, but these compacts currently are not uniform licenses for all states. They're just permission for someone in one state to call into another state and treat a patient if that state has adopted the compact. So it's going to be a little bit frustrating for a while. The ethical rules are going to be more or less uniform, but you end up subject to the scope in your own state from your own board and to the state you're calling into or going into to work.
And you know, from my, Helen and Stan, stop me if I'm wrong, but this was really not the brainchild, but certainly the emphasis of the speech language pathologist, who typically only have a few CPT codes, which are easy to translate over state lines. And so it's a less complicated issue in the speech world than it is in the audiology world, where there are more greater differences in how we practice things like, you know, remote state hearing aid fittings. And so I understand and agree with Helen and Stan that, yeah, they're going to be kinks to work out for sure, but that's what the boards are going to be for. Good.
I don't see any other questions right now if you want to move on.
Okay. I'm going to just tell you so that we don't have to waste time as I flip back and forth between screens. There are really four resources that I want you to have. How to find out what laws are in the hopper, what's happening, what's being presented, where it is, and even who's voting on it. That was the first website that I showed you. Number two, what are the laws of Georgia? And that's here. And I'll tell you, there are several different ways to access those laws. You have lexis.com, you have case something, but this is a link for the actual laws as they are written in the state. If it doesn't fit here, then it's not right. The next thing I wanted to show you, the rules of, this is under the Secretary of State's office and the State Board of Examiners. These are the rules that we have gone in and interpreted that Georgia code. So for example, the requirements for licensure, as I open this, and this website is slow, so I'm only going to show you a couple of things. Sometimes it never opens up. Let's see. Oh, it's going to fuss at me and make me put in a name. And then it's probably not going to work anyway. We'll see. If not, we'll move on. Yeah, it doesn't like me. But that's a firewall issue on in my screen, not yours. So when you use that, you can actually look exactly at the rules for the state of Georgia. And then finally, this is the Georgia Board's the GABESPA board's website, which is really useful. These are where those little things come up. For instance, what's an appropriate CEU? What are we doing with telehealth? I love the current message from the board. We are all in uncharted territory with the global onset of COVID-19. It's sort of the disclaimer of we're trying to figure it out too. So those are the four websites that you need to access and look over periodically to make sure you're in compliance. All right, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Were there questions at that point? And the orange thing flashed again.
Nope, just some compliments to Helen and Stan for all the work they're doing.
Amen. Let me tell you, that's coming. All right, those are the four websites. Also, I would like to put in a plug for all of these websites. I use them all, and they're good. The ASHA advocacy resources, it's good. I know there are some strong feelings about ASHA, but I wouldn't ever hesitate to use the resources that they put out there. AAA Georgia, the GASHA website is good, and the Georgia Academy of Audiology is good. So resources. All right, because this was a question, I just wanted to go over one time. This is what the law says about the audiology scope of practice. And I think I'll not read it directly to you, but I wanted to show you, this is it. We get scope of practice questions a good deal. And let me tell you, this is what we always come back to. This is, while there are requirements about how long you have to keep calibration certifications and what a hearing aid is and what a bill of sale should include, these are the scope of practice definitions. And so I wanted to put this here in case anybody wanted to reference it. It's found in the Georgia Code, annotated 4344-3. You can certainly look it up, but there you go. It's a good long definition, and I think it covers us well. I'm not aware of anything that I need to amend it at this point. Let me know if I'm wrong. All right, part 3, the political considerations. And
Alice, let me add in there that this is sort of the basic piece when the audiology and speech boards are acting, but it's not the whole universe, because there are also exclusions, from the Audiology Practice Act that essentially allow the ENTs to do some things that are like audiology. And sometimes, occasionally, you'll find something that's a conflict between the medical board and the speech and audiology board. Not very often. But this is also the place where if you want to do more procedures and the ENTs don't want you to do them, you come in here and try to gain more permission for what you would like in your own practice. Those are very, very tough, rare political fights. But, this needs to be reviewed periodically, not just by the board, but the practitioners too will have sometimes a sense of, we want to do X or Y, or other states are allowing more people to do some things that we don't want them to do, or allowing audiologists to do things that our medical board has been more conservative about. So this is, it's the basics. It's general in some levels and specific in others. It's just complex, and that's why the board exists, frankly. So.
Yeah. Yep. There's another section that I didn't reference, but an example of what could be changed, and in my opinion, would be a great move for audiology, is that we would be able to bill and perform cannula 3 positioning, which on our patients for pay. Anyway, here's the scope of practice. So political considerations. This was a baptism by fire for me to learn about this in my personal practicing scope life a few years ago. This started, I had my first bit of knowledge in 2015, and Helen and Stan were phenomenal and walked me through it. And then we had an entire catastrophe in 2017. And I'm going to walk you through those real quick, because the political considerations and advocacy for your profession absolutely has implications on how to ethically practice in the state. I can tell you that there are folks who don't care about the ethics of appropriate audiologic treatment for our patients. They see the dollar signs of hearing aids in particular and will do anything to get at it. Okay, a little bit about lobbyists, in case you wonder how the process works. Our lobbyists, which are Helen and Stan, they are the middleman, and they inform everybody about the important issues. The legislators and the providers, they stand in the gap and are the communicators between both sides on problems, issues, opportunities, whatever it may be. They're, in my opinion, the brain. They anticipate the politics of a moving bill. They advise us. They guide us through either support or opposition. They absolutely stick their necks out for us, and I have seen in ways that I never appreciated before. Remember, when they're fighting against somebody for us, often that's somebody that they need to be on good terms with later. And so the political dance is unbelievable. And I absolutely think they're amazing. Y'all are great. They keep an eye on everything. For instance, these are two things that Helen came out with this week. As she sends out weekly bulletins that your GAA board gets out to you and filters through and looks at. There's a House Bill 41 hopes to increase consumer access to healthcare. Speaker Ralston issued a memo to look at protocol for safety addressing COVID. They keep us updated on generally what's happening. The little things that you kind of look at and go, okay. And then the big things that you go, holy cow. All right, I saw the orange button.
Just more comments and compliments, so we're good.
I'm going to start monitoring this. The lobbyists are critical in the entire process. It all falls apart. I have also seen firsthand, there are guys, I've also seen firsthand what happens when individuals try to present their cases in the Capitol without lobbyists. It doesn't happen. It's disheartening if you want to know the truth. You feel like as a taxpayer and upstanding citizen of Georgia that you would have all the access to your legislators that you think you should have. It doesn't happen. I want to walk you through two bills really quickly to show you how the legislation comes up, what happens, and then how it affects you directly as you try to practice. So in 2015, House Bill 232 was introduced, and it was at the base a plot to kick the single audiologist, there's only one, off the State Board of Hearing Aid Dealers and Dispensers. So this is what happens. I'm going to pull this up. Let me make sure you can see it. All right. Here we go. So when a bill is introduced, it takes the current law, which is, or there's an introduction, a bill, you know, what happens. It wants to change the composition of the board, the qualifications of members, the terms of office. There's a summary page or summary paragraph, and then it looks at the current law and proposed changes are made. Let me show you how to read these as you're learning to read them on your own. When words are struck, that means that the proposal is to eliminate that word. So it was an elimination of the requirement that members of the board shall be residents of the state. Also, an elimination of one of whom shall be an audiologist under Chapter 44 of the title. The proposal was to get rid of those points and then add the things that are underlined in the practice of dispensing hearing aids. The bill came up and it is dropped, and Helen and Stan catch it, and then they give us a call and say, there's a bill on the floor, or there's a bill that's been proposed that would change the structure of the Board of Hearing Aid Dispensers, and it would take the audiologist off. And so then we get together as an organization, as GAA. This is not a license board thing, by the way. This is an association, a state association topic. We get together as a GAA board and say, all right, what do we think about this? We need to roll this out to members. We'll ask different opinions. We take the group temperature of the practicing audiologist, which was pretty unanimous on this one. No way, that is not in the best interest of the hearing impaired patient in Georgia. Once you decide that's your position, then you got to fight it. So this is some of the letters that we rounded up in support of, what's the right word, Helen, of coming against the bill that was proposed, of fighting the bill, opposing it.
Right. You put together your arguments for the opposing the legislation before the various committees that we had to go in front of.
Is this still sharing it sideways?
Yeah, it's sideways.
Okay. It's really just an example of, we had to reach out to the American Academy of Audiology as supporting letters backing, at this point, GAA's opposition of the bill. So reached out to the American Academy of Audiology and sent that to Representative Amy Carter, who headed the bill's proposal when it was introduced. And then we also reached out to ADA, same thing, had them write a letter in support of our opposition, and then reached out to a private practice. It happened to be my mother, who was a past GASHA president. And again, you reach out to the community to show support for how you view the proposed legislation. We had another one, a much bigger one in 2017, which was a plot. It was crazy. It was a plot to deregulate entirely the sale of hearing aids in Georgia, allowing for unregulated internet sale of the hearing aids without examination or prescription by a licensed professional. This was actually a proposed change to the Georgia hearing aid dealers and dispensers licensing laws. It was not an audio, it wasn't part of the chapter 44 where we are licensed, but it affected us because it affected deeply the hearing impaired patient base in the state of Georgia. This is one where Kate and Helen and Stan and I spent, I don't know how much time, a lot of time. I mean, a whole lot of time at the Capitol directly fighting. And this was an eye-opening experience to have a big company. This was backed by big money as a hearing aid company tried hard to be the first to legally sell hearing aids over the internet after the rules came through that we were going to see OTC hearing aids. Well, this is where they tried to drop that first, to be the first into the market through a Savannah manufacturer. But it was eye-opening to look at what kind of influence and power big money and big dollars have, in what interest they have and things that directly affect us. We spent a lot of time fighting it and a whole lot of educating legislators about why this was unethical, why deregulating hearing aids was so dangerous for patients, how it would impact even third-party insurance coverage of hearing aids because they might now be covering hearing aids that are not intended for that patient. So eye-opening. I'm going to keep going. We wrote a lot of letters that you'll have access to. And then what Helen and Stan have referenced now, House Bill 34, the Interstate Compact. I sincerely encourage you to read it. It affects you in the sense of there will be a stricter reference on who can get licensed in the state. Georgia would be the home state of audiologists applying for licensure in Georgia. It'll add things like fingerprints, background checks, and some stricter barriers to entry. But it would allow practicing over state lines that is currently not available. So that's House Bill 34. Okay, this is a good place to pause if there are any questions.
No questions right now. Wait, hold on a second. Helen, do you want to go ahead and talk about that?
Well, I can just add some flavor to this, and Stan can too. But what you all are not hearing is the fact that GAA went up against a newly elected senator with his first bill in his first committee hearing. And we were not exactly well received because we had submitted our information to the committee chairman the night before at like 5:30 in the evening. And he was less than pleased with us because we were coming out swinging against this bill that Senator Brass had authored. And GAA defeated Senator Brass's bill. But the long and short of it is that Alice made a friend with Senator Brass because of just working through the process and making him understand the intricacies around your profession and working with the Secretary of State along those same lines about the profession. This took a village really to get this bill defeated, and kudos go out to Alice and Kate and the rest of the folks at GAA for working alongside Stan and me to, achieve the success that we had.
I had to fill out an application for a whole different thing and talked about what's one of the hardest problems that you solved, and that's the one I talked about, just because holy cow, that was complex, and you can't make enemies. Enemies in politics is a no-no. So anyway, I think it's important to know though that my impression is that we have good standing with in the General Assembly. We have earned good street cred as not being pains in the butt, and we have made friends there, which is in our favor should we need it going forward. And that's important. And let me tell you, that's when you stand in line with Helen and Stan, you actually get an audience with the legislator, which is an incredible experience. When you don't, when they leave you in line so they can go find somebody, nobody talks to you. But it was okay.
I want to just really quickly say that just in case nobody's on the chat, I love the street cred. That's fantastic. But it was so much Stan and Helen, and oh my goodness, Alice Lena with her underlying sales skills, which are fantastic, to talk to these people and listen, more importantly. And by the next year, well, so the first year, Matt Brass was our enemy. And by the second year, he was texting us saying, there may be this legislation coming up. What do you girls think? And that is such a key to keep your friends close and keep your enemies even closer. And Alice did such a fantastic job under Stan and Helen's directive to do that. So kudos.
You too. You were there the whole time. So I would love input from the group. In terms of the quiz, it's been a long time since I've done a CEU online, and I need more. Can we go over these answers together, or am I not allowed to even show you where to find the answers?
No, I think it's fine.
Okay, so these are common questions, and the reason I put them in is because I wanted to be able to show you where to find them. You may come up with similar questions yourself. True or false? All audiologists in Georgia must be licensed practitioners, state licensed practitioners. Well, when we pull this up, and let's make sure it does without being a pain, no person shall practice or hold himself or herself out as being able to practice in the state unless they are licensed. There you go. If somebody ever asks you, do you have to have a license to practice? The answer is yes. Let's see. See if I can pull this back up easily. Oh, forgive me. Part 2. True or false? I would love for somebody to take this one. An ENT's nurse may provide hearing tests at a satellite clinic where she is the only provider in the building because she is billing under the physician's supervision. Anybody want to take that one?
A screening or a full hearing test?
Good question. Let's do a full billable hearing test.
I would say no.
Excellent. Can you cite what's the difference? It's small, but it's there.
Between a screening and a diagnostic?
No, the trick on this one is where the ENT is physically standing.
On site.
Gotcha.
Say again?
On site or not?
Got to be on site. Got to be on the premises. Doesn't have to be direct supervision, but does have to be on the premises. So that's the answer there. Let's go to this one. Number 3. Here's a good one. I'd love somebody to get this right. Only one instance of one type of criminal activity within a small period is permitted for the administrative processing of a new license. Side note, the administrative processing means the board, really the legal team for the board gets the application, looks at it, evaluates it, and sends it on without board review. We certainly don't see every license that comes through unless there's any kind of problem. Now, the threshold for problems is very low. So if there's anything out of whack, we will see it. But if it's standard, we don't see it until it's approved. But what is this once permissible offense, this criminal activity that you can get away with one time and they'll still process it through? Okay, I'm going to show you where to find it. You can have one DUI, which is interesting. Here's where you find this type of information. I think the majority of the questions we have about licensing and practice are not in the rules and regs and not in the law. Rather, it's in some of the interpretation and in some of the provisions that the board has adopted. So on the board website, particularly under applications and form downloads, when you start looking through all of these, and there are a lot, here are your applications, here are your references, your continuing education guidelines. They honestly look kind of boring. But for example, if you look at the speech board policy manual and pull this up, And on the last page, you can see, again, apologies for making you sick. Applications received that report only one DUI within the last 3 years and verified by a GCIC report, this is the only criminal activity that you've been guilty of, can be approved administratively. And the reason I bring this up is not, it's a point of funny, but it's also to say those board postings are important. We do get lots of questions where we end up directing people back to what we've published, but I would look through them. I would just once a year or once every 6 months, look through them and see what's changed and what's come up sort of to the board's attention, and we'll post about it. All right, the next one. Apparently I have 2 or 3 of these up. Only one, okay, number 4, how long must I maintain calibration records? Does anybody know? It's written in the rules for 36 months, and that's the site to go to. My firewall won't let me pull that up, but I wanted to show you. Not 12, not 24, but you can be audited by, if there's a complaint against you that you're not calibrating equipment timely or keeping records of that, then the board can audit that. True or false, a speech language pathologist may conduct pure tone air conduction testing. Anybody know?
True.
True. There's a provision though. Do you know what the provision is?
No.
And educational.
Close. Yeah, but and the education is one of 2 words.
For special needs?
Pass or fail. They can only report it in a pass or fail context, but it can be actual threshold testing. They are not allowed to report the thresholds though in the documentation. They can just report pass or fail. And with that, true or false, an audiologist may perform a speech articulation screening.
True.
True. With the same provision, it can only be called pass or fail. I end up doing artic screenings on kids in my area, and it makes me happy that I'm an audiologist and I just report pass or fail, and it's under direct supervision of a speech language pathologist. So there you go. Number 7, what are the educational requirements for licensure as an audiology assistant? I've had lots of folks ask about this. The short answer is it has to be a board approved program. It's not that's the end story. You know, the hearing aid dealers and dispensers have to be of good moral character and have a high school degree or a high school equivalent. Speech aids, I've lost it. It's not on the tip of my tongue, but they have different requirements. But for audiology, they have to have completed a board approved program under the direct supervision of a licensed audiologist. And once that program is approved, then they complete it, that work is submitted, and then we approve them.
Alice, isn't there a certain amount of undergrad training of any degree that has to be completed for that as well?
I'll tell you what, it's worth looking. Hang on.
I want to say it's like 30 hours.
It's 40 hours.
40, okay.
40 hours, but I do want to show, no, you've got a good, that's my 609. It can be, you can have a bachelor's, you can have a technical degree in the field, and you still have to complete the board approved program. And there are let's see if it's here. I think it's in the rules. I don't think it's in the code.
I'd love to know what programs are approved as well as what they're allowed to do.
I think actually,
I could speak to this. This is Lacey.
hey,
We had a lot of audiology assistants in our practice, Audiological Consultants of Atlanta. I had 2 assistants at one point, and NOVA was a program that all of our assistants had to go through. And it was, I want to say it was a 6 to 12, about at least a 6-month training that they had to go through. And most of them had everybody that came through our program had a bachelor's degree of some sort that was going into this. And they were able to do air conduction screenings for us. We would do the speech testing. They would help us with sound field testing. They could help us do real ear measures. We would be in the room with them, but they would place the probe tubes and, actually run real ear measures on people who were picking up repairs or doing maybe picking up a remade ear mold or picking up a remake of some sort and running real ear measures to compare versus prior real ear measures to see if they were consistent. We had them doing cleanings, doing troubleshooting. They did all of our orientations with patients for fittings. They also were doing the instruction on any assistive devices like remote microphones or comm pilots or accessories, teaching on Bluetooth, troubleshooting Bluetooth, etc. So they can be a huge time saver and make you extremely efficient as a provider. But I do think there is a lot of training that needs to make sure that they are supervised and properly trained in order to be that effective.
Lacey, can they do hearing aid programming? And what about app counsel?
They do not do any programming. They are allowed to teach on the apps. Absolutely. They would be the ones who that would be part of the orientation. They would teach on how to do the programming, how to do, Bluetooth troubleshooting, as well as, making sure people are closing their apps, their Safari pages, making sure they're closing or updating their iOS, and practicing a phone call with the patients, teaching them how to change to speakerphone to iPhone, etc.
Yeah, Kate, number 8, again, when you get this, 8 speaks to that. It was actually a complaint filed against it was rival companies that were warring with each other. But the complaint was that the audiology assistant, a kid came in who had lost a hearing aid, and let's say it was a blue hearing aid, and lost his blue, filed for a replacement and wanted red. And the assistant let him pick out the new color on a color wheel looking at the case selection, and that was actually reported. So they can't, there are lots of things that in the ticky things, including case selection and whatnot, that look at when you get a chance, look at the rules at this spot, and you'll see what the current adoption is. That's number 8. Number 9, can I get CEU credit in Georgia for the Medicaid reimbursement class I attended? The answer is no. It's not an approved CEU topic. This lecture is under the series of how to ethically practice in the state. Now we can talk about Medicaid reimbursement in the middle of that, but if it's a Kim Cabot type class, which I highly recommend, but that may not be appropriate for CEUs in the state of Georgia. And then number 10, true or false, I must have ASHA Cs to become a Georgia licensed audiologist. And I hope everybody knows no, not true. I will say, does it make it easier to get licensed? It does. And I consult in a lot of different states, and I'm licensed in several states. So easy with your Cs, like it or love it or hate it, in any of those. It's the truth.
Plus, we have another question.
Sure.
Miriam's asking, can the audiology assistant restore settings to a hearing aid, and can they run a feedback test?
I don't think so. I need, let me mark that down. If Miriam will email me, let me check on that, send you the link, and be sure.
Thanks.
Happy to. Okay. I know we're really short on time, and I really want, if there are any more questions at this point, then please ask those. And if not, I think I'm just going to go over one ethical case that I found really interesting. And then I'll leave it open for questions as long as you need me. Anything else? Anything you might want to talk about specifically?
Not right now. I think you can go ahead.
Okay. Well, actually, there are two cases that I did want to show you, and let me just be clear that these may not be directly from Georgia, because I kind of monitor these in several different places. But there was one that was interesting, and I feel like all of us practitioners have had some variation of this at some point. This was a letter written to the board complaining from the family of a patient, and the complaint was that the provider made false statements about the nature of the patient's current medical condition. This was a patient who had some kind of soft diagnosis of dementia, and the provider alluded in treatment notes that the patient was having a hard time with instructions, possibly due to misunderstanding. Also, the letter alleged that the provider didn't schedule appointments at a time best suited for the patient, which was inappropriate care because it didn't meet the patient's needs. That standardized protocols were not followed when given a cognitive screening, and that there was an allegation that the provider suggested to the family that an altered timing of medication would be appropriate or would be useful, and the family member said that triggered a seizure for the patient. So it was a concerning letter where you certainly worry about quality of care. But I have to point out there was no mention of aberrant treatment or medication suggestions in the medical record by this provider. So I wanted I had hoped that we could start a discussion about it, but does anybody have any thoughts about what the board looking at licensing is responsible for doing in this moment? The answer is the board had to look at were any ethical violations made. Was standard of care breached? Was there any kind was there any specific and proven misconduct on the part of that provider? And the answer is we do that by looking back at the submitted treatment notes and looking at what was actually in the record for that patient, because otherwise it's the patient's son complaining without any kind of proof on the care of or the pathway of a provider. So the answer is we requested that treatment notes be provided. There was no mention of any of that found in the record, and so no further action was made by the board. Interesting. But haven't we all had this moment where you wonder if you wonder if you're within your bounds of trying to be helpful, and you certainly cannot in practice suggest a different timing of medication. So if that was true, that was a problem, but there was no proof of it. But you do get sticky situations where family really disagrees with what you say. Let's do this one. This was an interesting one, and I just want to show you what the board is and is not capable of. It was an applicant for application by endorsement, and it was from an approved state, not by C's, but from license of a state that was an approved one. Provider was successfully licensed in other places, relocating for work, nothing crazy. No issues with the application at all. In fact, it went through the administrative process of being approved. Nothing stood out, so there were no flags. However, after approval, we started getting some crazy correspondence where they were long missive emails about suspicions of all kinds of abuse from the provider about the provider. So it was sort of a self-directed narrative. Concern of possible kidnapping, concern that they were going to be enslaved. There were actual aliens mentioned, suspicion that drugs had been injected and used, and there was a tracker and a device, and you name it. And points to consider as you think about, well, what in the world are you supposed to do with this? There was never a complaint filed, never, in any state against this provider. In fact, the board was the only one to even know about the correspondence because it came directly to the board. Perfect background checks, perfect everything, but goofy enough that you certainly get wide-eyed and go, whoa, this would be scary if this was a practicing person in the state. So my question is, what can the board do about this? The answer is nothing, which is alarming. But we don't have any kind of provision for passing psychological standards for providers in the field of audiology or speech pathology. You can't ask anybody to be evaluated. Given that there was never a complaint filed, that they perfectly met licensing requirements as outlined in the Georgia Code, it is what it is. You can be kind of nutty and still practice, and that's okay.
Alice, y'all ever put like a watch on anybody or anything like that?
Can do it because it's not provided for in the law. It is really eye-opening to look at it and go, holy cow. I mean, this could be my dentist. This could be, you may not want to pull back the curtain here. But no, by what is allowed by the law, there is no problem with her to practice. I see the thing beeping. Anybody got questions about that one?
No, just comments about how scary that is
It's
to think about.
that one was a really hard one. And let me say, this person desperately needs help, and that was the other part that was really bothersome. And as much as we could suggest it and hope for it, and try to point this person in a direction, there were limitations on what we could even say with that as well. And so it's a sad case in every situation where a person's not getting the help they need. I mean, this person really does, this would be a miserable problem.
And Kate's asking, what's the process for reporting someone who is acting a little off? I mean, if you can't do anything about it, is there a point of reporting it?
We went with this one all the way to the top in terms of what legally can be done. Nothing. You can't violate HIPAA. This was sent with confidential listed on it, so you couldn't share it except to say, oh my gosh, there's somebody who really needs help. But no, we if there was an answer beside, oh man, we never found it.
So what would be the process for reporting unethical behavior?
Well, it would, somebody would have to specifically report what the unethical behavior was. So there was one, I'm trying to remember, the drug thing, there's a provision in the license that you can't have been convicted for drugs, for drug abuse, or it asks you, have you had a conviction for drug? I can't remember the wording, but do you do drugs? And so, but you couldn't violate HIPAA privacy by reporting the person. And so, since nobody ever reported it in a direct channel, it was left. I'll also tell you, this provider actually has not yet relocated to Georgia and still emails. And so it's not there yet. But interesting, certainly interesting. All right, one more and then we'll go. This is one that I feel like shows what the board really does do. If there's anything the board can do. Previous case, we couldn't do anything. This one, this person, a whistleblower, reported a provider inappropriately billing for services. It turns out the provider was billing a guy who'd been dead for 2 days. Now, the provider claimed to not know that the patient was deceased, which is hard to, so it's not clear whether she actually knew that the patient was deceased or not. It was clear that she was just filling in a chart and billing for it and getting paid and checking off the box. What happened was, as soon as that person that she was confronted, she admitted everything. There was no, it was a hands up, I am sorry, I did wrong, and there was no pretense of I didn't understand or anything else. She cooperated with her employer, she cooperated with the license board, and the board's action was swift. Suspended her license for 12 months where she couldn't practice at all in the state, imposed a fine, imposed a probationary period where all treatment notes must be signed off by a board approved supervisor, And the supervisor was required to submit quarterly reports to the board for review on her performance. Additional direct supervision requirements of that supervisor couldn't just be on premises, but had to be watching the patient, the provider see a patient. And then an additional 24-month probationary period where that provider must have 0 complaints. So that's, once we finally do get the moment to police an ethical moment, situation, that's an example of what happens. I have other things that are included, and I know we don't have time to go over those, but
you have until 9 o'clock if you want to keep going. If you still have more
Is this
stuff.
This is a 2-hour one? Oh my gosh. I tell you what.
Don't feel the pressure to go the full 2 hours, but just if you do have more information, don't feel
okay.
like you have to jump off.
Maybe we'll do this. Let me go over some of the hot topics that I want to show you guys, because I do feel strongly, and this is, I have said these things before and they weren't well received because they're kind of hard to hear, but let me say them because I think this is the path forward for audiology. Hot topics. Look at some of these statistics. In the communication disorder field, the SLPs are about half work in the schools and different educational facilities. The other half work in healthcare facilities. An audiologist, we are much more represented in healthcare facilities than in school facilities. So that's sort of the breakdown of how the fields are separate. But in terms of here, in terms of the statistics of how many providers, these numbers are probably not exactly correct, but they're close. And certainly the ratio is on. We've got about 350 audiologists licensed in the state. Now I'm going to bring back to how many members does GAA have right now? 70 something. We have got to get better participation.
72.
72. That is in no way a comment or criticism of GAA. In no way. I have been in that seat and I know how hard it is. But we have to figure out some way. That's horrible participation in the state. On the other hand, there are close to 5,000 speech language pathologists licensed here in the state, and that's a bigger number. There's no doubt from my experience, and I know Kate and I've talked about this many times, little groups of 3 people don't have much splash at the Capitol. And so when stuff hits the fan and we are having to protect our profession or grow our profession, we hadn't even gotten in a growing posture since we Helen and Stan redid the licensing laws in 2006. Hadn't been much growth. The compact was really put forward by GASHA, which is predominantly, of course, speech language pathologists. Now, I'm going to make a plug for that. They have included audiology in that bill. Yes, we are licensed together, and so it only makes sense to do that. But I find it important to look and say, okay, when we go to the Capitol, when we try to make any difference in what the practicing rights look like in our state, the legislators don't know the difference in audiologists and speech pathologists. We explain it every time. And when we go as separate groups, they kind of look like, wait, who are you? And so you've got the Georgia Academy here, and typically we are much smaller. And then you've got the Georgia Speech and Hearing Association here. Last time Kate and I went, it was what, like 4 of us to 15 of them.
And Alice also talked the difference of the day of the dispensers versus the day of cardiology.
The dispensers have an incredible lobbying effort. They pour money into this, and they will come back for audiology. I promise. That's not a dead issue at all. Let me say, things like occupational therapy has an incredible representation at the Capitol. Physical therapy has an optometry, you name it. All the different podiatry, the different professions that when we explain ourselves or that we are often compared to are so much better represented through attendance than us. I hate that. I'm an audiologist. I'm not a speech language pathologist. I like them. My mom's one. I mean, that's the practice. But realistically, if we want to get things done, I so suggest we work together. And that's why I'm a member of both. And I think we ought to consider this. And I know that's not a popular statement, but that's my Enneagram type 8. I don't mean to dissolve GAA. I mean, let's figure out how to put it all together.
Alice, and this may be a good question for Stan and Helen too, but what's your opinion as we go into 2021 in the session when we may or may not be allowed because of COVID? How do we make our voice heard? Of course, besides our lobbyists, how do we have those meetings?
Good question. I defer.
So Stan, do you want to take this or do you want me to try to work?
I think that's the one you usually get.
So we're happy to try to facilitate discussions with lawmakers. We do that all the time. We'll try to set up something virtually to have a discussion with someone, or we can maybe meet with them off the side of the Capitol after, the hours that they're there from like 8 to 6 or whatever. Maybe we could have a cup of coffee with them, or maybe we might meet them really early in the morning before they go to the Capitol, or maybe we could meet during lunch somewhere. I mean, there are ways in which we can try to get your voices heard. We can also arrange that the organization can maybe present at a hearing if there's a bill that's of interest to you. For instance, if House Bill 34 is actually introduced and pursued this session by Representative Belton, then of course you all would want to come down. And when I say come down, you would actually want to be a participant in the hearing in the House and the Senate as the bill moves through the process. So I mean, we can make that happen. We're very capable of getting you hooked up with the right folks to make the necessary remarks heard by your organization. I think that's what you're asking.
Lacey has a question. Lacey, you want to just go ahead and ask your question directly?
So I will say this about the day at the Capitol. Right now, we don't really understand what the protocols are going to be. Due to the fact that things were so limited in June, it may be that you will have to postpone doing your day at the Capitol this year and maybe look at 2022 just because of the COVID restrictions. And again, we don't know what the protocols are going to be implemented by the House. As I mentioned earlier, the Speaker has just formed that committee.
Good.
We'll know a little bit more in a few weeks, but probably a lot of things will get postponed again.
So one of the things that we keep hearing is a rumor mill. There's a petition going around that lawmakers are trying to get other lawmakers to sign so that they gavel in on January the 11th and they adjourn for a few weeks so that the state can kind of come to grips with our COVID numbers and hopefully.
And what happens with vaccines.
Right, and what happens with vaccines. So we don't know where that's headed yet. We don't know if that petition is going to be really taken seriously or not. So it's a little bit early to tell. But we've also heard, independent of that, that there might be a move that the House and Senate will come in on January 11th. They'll tackle the amended budget pretty quickly, and then they'll adjourn for a few weeks and then come back like they did this year to address the big budget and other outstanding issues that they haven't addressed. So it's kind of a little bit early yet. Like Stan said, we'll know a little bit more in a couple of weeks.
Helen, do you all have any idea where audiologists will stand in the healthcare provider priority for vaccinations?
I have not heard anything along those lines yet.
I haven't either. What's been going on in Washington about that with Asher or anybody else?
The only thing I know is I contracted public health and I'm eligible because of that contract and because I have direct patient care through public health. But I'm assuming that's because it's a state program.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
I
I think we'll roll out with the nursing homes first. They'll probably work through some of the medical specialties that are like hospitalists or, people who are directly involved in care in the ICUs or this, and then it'll start flowing down from there. But we're probably really talking April or May, June before there's millions of doses out there.
Yeah.
You may have noticed, the firefighters had to make a special PR pitch to get included with the ER people. There's so much in, definitions count, and talk about healthcare workers, they don't necessarily be pulled into that, but nobody would doubt that, the ambulance drivers and the firefighters, anybody sort of on the front line needs to get the vaccine right away.
Yeah.
It just takes a while to process that stuff. Let's just hope it works. And it looks like it will.
All right, want to do the last two slides? We say we did it?
Go for it.
Yes.
All right. So the difference in licensure and certification. We get this question a lot on the board. I don't think this is I think this is, I think this group would certainly have a handle on this. I do find the AAA's position on the difference in licensure and certification is pretty good. I will say, I said it earlier, as a person who has gone through the licensing process in multiple states and been involved, having your C's paves the way. Now, I also understand the fight against that. That's ASHA versus AAA versus ADA, and all of it is they're hot buttons that we definitely don't want to get into. I will tell you though that if you were simply business minded and trying to get licensed in different states, which the compact may help with, of course, but if you have other needs of being licensed in different states, your C's make a difference. Of course, the problem is if you didn't get them when you got out of school, it's harder to get them, to go back and get them. That's just my plug for if you have them, use them. Also, I want to say that to bill Alabama Medicaid and be reimbursed legally for hearing aids, you need your C's. That may not be relevant to you guys in Central Georgia. It is critical for me on the state line right next to Alabama.
Alice, I have a question about the C's. I dropped my C's when I got my AUD, so I had my C's. And when I called ASHA about getting those back, they said that I would have to retake the praxis. And that's still the case?
Yes. Which I think that should be amended. I really do. Particularly for somebody who's been practicing for any length of time. Now, if it were up to me, they would use, 5 years, 10 years, whatever the threshold may be. But unfortunately, that is the current case. Also, of course, for student supervision, I'm not aware of any site where a student is a third year or fourth year that allows that supervision to get school credit unless their supervisor has their C's. We all have them in this practice. It makes life easier. It really does. Also for credentialing, which is the last slide. Here we are in the home stretch. We get this maybe more than any other question. Wait, I am licensed. Why aren't I getting paid? Okay, they're different. Licensing is one thing. Credentialing with insurances is entirely another thing. I have the great fortune of having whom I think might be the best billing and office manager ever for audiology. He's phenomenal. And different places call him all the time with questions about this. And I called him right before I made this and said, what was our latest time to completion for credentialing with all major insurers, the CMOs, everything? He can get it done in about 90 days, but prior to that is a miracle. And we have seen it take up to 7 months, particularly for TRICARE, for credentialing a provider. I'll tell you the secret to TRICARE. we finally got mad and looked at our waiting list, and speech was a big part of this. Looked at our waiting list and said, okay, there are 100 kids who are not receiving services and who are traveling to Atlanta or, you know, greater than 50 miles because you're not getting providers credentialed in time, and you were displacing 100 kids and 150 people with families and everything else. And we sent that to Senator, at that point, Johnny Isaacson, in his office. If you use your senators, use either your state senators or your big senators. And it was done the next day. Next time, we included that letter with the next provider application we sent, done the next day. We let it go, decided not to press the issue for the next one. The next one, provider we tried to credential without the letter came into the same problem. This time called Senator Loeffler's office. Had it done as soon as she reached out. So it was incredibly frustrating. And if you're in that cycle, that spin cycle of the washing machine, reach out to your big senators. It's also, if you have good reason, it's sort of in my opinion, a slam dunk for them to make a difference without it being a big deal. They just send an inquiry. And so got it done like that. The last thing I'll say, this is not about licensing, but I have helped with several audits. Be careful. You can get paid and it be recouped because everything wasn't perfect in the beginning. The fact that you got paid doesn't mean you keep it. So make sure. Now you'll keep it if you were within the letter of the law and of the credential and of everything you needed. That can't be overturned, but you be careful. Just because you got paid doesn't mean they're going to let you have it forever. Okay. That's the end for me. Any questions?
Now, I posted just a comment that regarding the supervision, the certification and licensing and supervising students.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some discretion depending on the university and what they need. Because I have been supervising Auburn and UF students, and I don't have my C's. So I got a special, accommodation from them because they needed specific pediatric.
I'm so
supervision.
surprised about Auburn. I mean, we do so much Auburn because of proximity here.
They're starting to, from what I understand, my daughter's about to graduate from UF, and so I've had conversations with the staff there, but from what I understand, they're starting to pull away from the requirement of the C's for supervision. And I just think they can make that determination based on who the supervisor is. And what
I love to hear it. I didn't know that. But love to hear it.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. It says, yes, Nova, you do not need your C's. Julia put that comment there. So from Nova University, you don't need to have your C's to supervise. And then Kate's just wanting everybody to recognize how wonderful our lobbyists are. We agree as well. And you too, Alice. You're such a great
I'm happy to help.
Resource.
Yeah, I'm not a professional with this, but I am happy to help. So reach out to me if something didn't make sense, or if I was wrong, or you need more answers. Just let me know.
That sounds great. Does anybody else have any other comments? Just a lot of thank yous out there. So thanks so much, Alice and Stan and Helen and Felicia. This was wonderful. And Kate for all your input as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Have a great night.